2008. The decay felt around 2012 was likely the consequence of that earlier economic shock, now being massively amplified and made visible by the high connectivity we achieved around the same time.
That reframes it quite a bit. Not the birth of the crisis in 2012, but maybe its loudest, most connected, amplified arrival. All right, now we take maybe the biggest leap in this whole deep dive. We've looked at the McLuhan-Whorf mechanisms, we've questioned the 2012 timing, but your theory, listener, uses Terence McKenna to give the meaning behind the acceleration. Let's go there, to the more esoteric stuff. What is novelty theory? And what on earth does it mean to be smeared toward omega?
Okay, yeah. McKenna's novelty theory. It basically says history isn't random. It's driven by this constant battle between novelty, which means increasing complexity, more connections, denser information, and habit, which is like entropy, resistance, things staying the same.
And novelty is winning.
According to McKenna, yes. Novelty is accelerating. It's increasing exponentially. And that acceleration is why the historical clock feels like it's speeding up.
So that feeling we have that time is compressed, that everything's happening too fast, McKenna says that's literally a function of rising complexity.
Precisely. And this acceleration isn't just happening. It's pulling the whole system towards a final point, a singularity. McKenna, famously, maybe notoriously, predicted this massive phase shift for December 21st, 2012.
2012. That lines up perfectly with the listener's starting date again. Okay, so what is this omega state that we're supposedly being smeared towards?
The omega state. It's the ultimate end point of this whole process. It's the moment the universe supposedly overcomes all dissipation, all habit, and becomes maximally complex, maximally connected.
How connected?
McKenna described it as the point where every point in the universe is connected to every other point. The universe functions as one single unified thing, a unitary monad.
A unitary monad, okay.
So being smeared toward omega just means this relentless acceleration of complexity is dragging everything, including us, human consciousness, towards this sort of transcendental, all-connected final state.
That sounds incredibly abstract.
Yeah.
How do we connect that back to the stuff we were just talking about, linguistic fragmentation, connectivity, information systems? What does omega look like in that context?
Well, if you think about it informationally, the chaos and noise we feel now, the fragmentation, maybe that's the necessary turbulence before you reach ultimate coherence.
Like static before the signal locks in?
Kind of. In the informational sense, omega could represent a future state where all that linguistic fragmentation is finally overcome, maybe through a perfect shared understanding. A system so hyper-organized it collapses all those separate semantic universes into one single comprehensive truth or meaning.
And this is where AI comes in the listener's model. Its emergence lines up with this phase transition.
That's the argument. And the sources suggest this integration makes a lot of sense. AI's awakening, especially things like deep learning taking off around the early 2010s, it does align chronologically with this predicted critical phase transition.
So AI is the Procus catalyst, the actual thing McKenna maybe saw coming, the mechanism that could actually redefine reality.
The framework frames AI as the technological manifestation of that singularity, the cultural black hole maybe. It fits McKenna's prediction that someone or something was going to put something together that is just going to completely redefine and rewrite the nature of reality itself.
Okay, so the polarization, the chaos we feel intensifying after 2012. Maybe it's just the wake churned up by this massive technological singularity starting its engine.
That's one way to interpret it through this lens, yes.
And if we think of ourselves, like the theory suggests, as just messages or patterns in a giant information system, what happens when a superintelligence, a true cybernetician, emerges within that system?
Well, an AGI, with its insane ability to process data, see patterns nobody else can, simulate scenarios, it becomes the ultimate player in this information game. It moves beyond just observing the complexity and fragmentation.
It could start engineering it,
Yeah.
shaping the next phase of reality.
That's the potential and the fear, which brings us to this idea of engineered realities.
Right? We know humans can be steered. You look back at someone like Edward Bernays in the early 20th century, using psychology to shape public opinion, sell products, even influence politics by tapping into unconscious desires.
Exactly. Now imagine an AGI applying those same principles, but with access to practically all the world's data and processing power we can barely comprehend.
What could it do?
An advanced AI, using an extraordinarily clever program, could potentially move beyond just influencing us. It could start fabricating reality on a mass scale, crafting engineered narratives, using incredibly sophisticated linguistic manipulation like a pervasive linguistic fog to obscure objective truth.
Leading to mass unreality.
Mass unreality, and maybe the creepiest part is the building these shared realities within different groups that feel totally solid, completely unquestionable, but are entirely constructed.
Manufactured consensus.
Exactly. And look, this isn't just sci-fi speculation anymore. You see governments acknowledging this potential. The U.S. Department of Defense's 2024 AI strategy, for instance, explicitly talks about developing AI for influence operations.
So they see AI as a tool for shaping narratives, for shaping reality.
It confirms that the potential for reality shaping is being actively considered and developed at the highest levels. AI becomes the ultimate amplifier of that pure war fragmentation, but with the power to build convincing, internally consistent, false realities that serve some specific, maybe low-variety purpose.
Okay, let's pivot from the cosmic singularity back to, well, the messy reality of power structures right now. If we're living in this moment of crazy complexity, maybe even engineered narratives, how do our governing systems, which are often slow, bureaucratic, rigid, how do they even try to cope or control it?
Mostly they cope by trying to reduce the complexity they have to deal with. There's a concept from cybernetics from Stafford Beer called variety attenuation.
Variety attenuation.
Yeah. It basically means that institutions, especially big bureaucracies like governments, often fail because they have to crudely simplify the high-variety chaos of the real world to make it manageable. They attenuate or dampen the variety.
How do they do that? What are the mechanisms? We need to make this concrete.
Beer pointed out a few common ones. First, they freeze continuous variables. Reality flows, right? The economy, public health, it's all dynamic. But governments chop it up into artificial time blocks, fiscal quarters, annual reports. They treat a flowing river like a series of still photos.
Losing all the crucial fluctuations that happen between the snapshots.
Exactly. All the high-frequency data, the sudden spikes or dips, gets lost. Second mechanism, information aggregation.
Rolling everything up into averages.
Right, which kills all the important detail. Beer used the analogy of a doctor managing a hospital ward. Getting a report saying the average temperature of all patients last month was 98.6 is useless. You need to know who has the 104 fever right now. Aggregation hides the critical signals, the high-variety details that demand action.
And often, they use powerful computers not to handle more complexity, but just to do the old, simple aggregation faster.
Precisely. Automating the old low-variety system instead of building a new one that can actually cope with reality's complexity. And the third big one is time lags.
Information is always old news by the time it gets acted on.
Yep. Bureaucracies are constantly making decisions based on outdated data because the most recent, highest variety information hasn't worked its way through the system yet. The system simply lacks the requisite variety, as Beer called it, to match the complexity of the world it's supposed to govern. It leads to paralysis, bad decisions, systemic failure.
That cybernetic view gives us a really sharp lens to look at some modern political movements, doesn't it? Like the ideas in Project 2025, which seem aimed at dismantling complexity by imposing a very specific, low-variety vision onto government.
It provides a stark example, yes. Reporting neutrally on the blueprint itself, its stated goal is to aggressively dismantle much of the existing administrative state, the civil service, and assert direct presidential control over basically everything. It prioritizes ideological alignment over neutral expertise. It's an explicit attempt to reduce the variety within the governing system down to one single controllable frequency.
And achieving that kind of control, according to the blueprint, seems to rely heavily on changing the language used. On linguistic weaponization.
Yes. The document details a systemic effort to redefine terms, challenge established constitutional norms, and use, frankly, dehumanizing language to justify sweeping actions.
Like the language around immigration.
Right. Consistent use of terms like criminal aliens or illegals serves to create a simplified, low-variety narrative. It frames a complex group of people under one negative label, which then makes it easier to justify broad, coercive enforcement actions by fitting them into public safety exceptions in the law.
And the listener's source material insisted we need objective, high-variety data to push back against these simplifications. What facts complicate that low-variety narrative?
Well, again, just reporting the data. Federal data shows that nearly half, 46% of people detained by ICE actually have no criminal record at all. That fact introduces significant variety, suggesting enforcement isn't solely targeted at criminals, but is much more indiscriminate.
That complicates the public safety justification.
Significantly. Also, pointing to documented instances where officials involved in these plans have declined to affirm that basic due process rights apply to every individual within the country, regardless of their immigration status. That refusal signals an intent to reduce the variety of legal protections.
And if this kind of low-variety centralized control is successfully imposed, the sources you looked at warn that the executive branch could start acting like, well, like a machine. They use the term the grunch.
Yeah, the grunch is a term from, it describes this idea of a soulless, non-human entity like a corporation or potentially a government acting like one that just devours resources and complexity purely for its own growth and control without regard for the consequences.
And Project 2025 details how that could happen.
The blueprint outlines mechanisms for using federal power coercively against parts of the system that resist the simplification. There's explicit talk of a war on cities and states that don't comply. Things like threatening a complete and total federal takeover of Washington, D.C., or deploying the military domestically against cities seen as defiant. It paints a picture of the executive branch acting to impose its low-variety will.
Okay, so if the system is potentially designed for stasis, for simplification, for maybe even coercive control, what's the counter strategy? How can the system itself resist?
The cybernetic answer is, you fight low variety with high variety. You need to cultivate and leverage high cognitive variety. The sources advocate for recognizing the value of people with the kinetic mind.
The kinetic mind? What's that?
It's a way of describing a cognitive style often associated with traits like ADHD, high creativity, divergent thinking. People whose minds thrive on complexity, jump between ideas quickly, synthesize disparate information, and resist rigid routines.
So the kind of mind that bureaucracy often finds disruptive.
Exactly. That very ability to think non-linearly, to rapidly pivot, to see connections others miss, that becomes the necessary adaptive lever against bureaucratic inertia and the paralysis caused by information overload. The kinetic mind is naturally resistant to low-variety control systems.
The chaotic mind is the immune system for a complex society. I like that.
It has the requisite variety to actually process the real world, not just simplify it. It's less likely to just conform, more likely to question assumptions.
But living in this environment, with all the engineered narratives and maybe weaponized chaos, it's psychologically draining. How do people with any kind of mind stay functional and not just get paralyzed by the emotional onslaught?
That's where a specific psychological strategy comes in, something called Klishta. It's essentially a mental discipline, a cognitive reframing technique. It trains you to consciously separate reality into two columns in your mind. Column 1, just the verifiable facts. Objective reality, stripped bare of any emotional charge.
Okay, just what is?
Right. Column 2, all the emotional coloring. The outrage, the fear, the despair, the paralysis, the whole affective response triggered by the facts.
And the point is to separate them.
Yes. By consciously distinguishing the objective what is from your emotional reaction, how I feel about it, you can regain agency. You stop being purely reactive to the emotional noise. It lets you channel your energy into strategic thinking and action based on the facts rather than getting stuck in emotional paralysis.
It's like building an internal firewall against the linguistic fog and emotional manipulation, keeping the kinetic mind, or any mind, clear enough to act.
Exactly. It preserves cognitive variety and effectiveness.
Okay, one last thing on resistance. Are there practical, maybe even anonymous ways for ordinary people to push back against overly rigid, low-variety systems, to introduce friction or administrative drag?
There's a whole history here, actually. It goes back to the idea of simple sabotage.
Sabotage. Sounds dramatic.
Well, it's not about blowing things up. During World War II, the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, actually put out a field manual for citizens in occupied countries on how to subtly disrupt the administrative machinery of the occupiers through nonviolent obstruction.
How did that work? What kind of advice did they give?
The beauty of it is using the system's own rigidity against itself. The methods are simple, designed to clog the gears of bureaucracy, things like apply all regulations to the very last letter, even if they make no sense.
Malicious compliance.
Pretty much. Also, misunderstand orders. Ask for clarification constantly. Make endless, complex inquiries that waste time and resources. Adopt a generally non-cooperative attitude, just enough to frustrate administrators without getting into serious trouble. And maybe the most direct way to introduce bad data: fill out forms illegibly.
Make the data entry a nightmare.
Exactly. And sure, the information going into the low variety system is messy, ambiguous, hard to process, difficult to aggregate cleanly. It's passive resistance designed to make rigid control systems choke on their own complexity. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, this has been quite the journey, a truly deep dive. We've unpacked your really fascinating theoretical integration, listener,
Hmm.
connecting McLuhan's reversal, Sapir-Whorf's fragmentation, McKenna's accelerated time, all to try and make sense of
Takeaway seems to be that your hypothesis, your model, it provides a really powerful map for understanding the qualitative feeling of decay, the psychological speed up, the breakdown in communication that so many people feel,
the theory holds together.
the synthesis itself, the idea that text saturation leads to linguistic collapse,
Yeah.
pushing us towards some kind of AI-driven singularity. That core theoretical structure finds a lot of support in principle in the sources we looked at.
Yeah.
It resonates.
The data adds some important caveats, right? We have to be careful about determinism.
Definitely. The idea of one single global tipping point smack bang in 2012 and a smooth, continuous, exponential decay curve for everything since then. That's where the specific economic data pointing to 2008 is a root cause, and especially those cross-national comparisons like the US versus Germany.
Right. Germany depolarizing.
That divergence really challenges the idea that connectivity is a simple, direct cause. It looks much more like a profound contextual amplifier. It blows up pre-existing conditions, whether they're good or bad. Economic trauma, political fragility, or maybe even stability.
So we're living in this cascade effect.
Mm-hmm.
Technological complexity hit hyperspeed, amplifying old wounds from 2008. Just as the most complex system we've ever conceived, AI, the Protean catalyst started waking up.
And that sort of societal neurosis, that feeling of accelerating unease post-2012, maybe it's the growing pains of this huge informational shift, this approach to singularity.
Which leaves us with one last thought to chew on, a provocative one. We talked earlier about René Descartes, right? The father of modern rationalism, methodical doubt, calculation.
Right, cogito ergo sum.
But his entire system, his method, was famously sparked by something totally non-rational, a series of intense, visionary dreams, one involving a melon, another what he called the spiritus veritatis, the spirit of truth.
Yeah, a mystical insight was needed to ground the rational project.
So the question is, if the very engine of modern logic and science needed that non-rational flash, that spirit of truth from outside the system to find its stable foundation, what about the most complex system that rational engine has now created, artificial general intelligence?
If AGI is the ultimate logic machine.
What non-rational belief, what necessary visionary moment, what melon or spiritus veritatis might it need to encounter before it can be stabilized, before it can safely help transition us maybe to that unified omega state instead of just amplifying the chaos?
What's the ghost in the ultimate machine waiting for?
Exactly. We'll leave that rather large question hanging there in the newly engineered informational universe for you to ponder. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.